The first gunshot split the air like thunder, sending birds scattering from the church steeple as Katherine Keller flinched behind her veil. The second shot finished what the town gossips had begun 3 years ago, her complete social death in Ordway, Colorado. "Get out." Her father-in-law bellowed, pistol aimed skyward, his face twisted with grief and fury. "No barren woman will stand at my son's grave pretending she was a proper wife." The funeral crowd parted like the Red Sea, eyes downcast as Katherine stood frozen beside the open grave of Thomas Keller, dead at 28 from a mining collapse, her husband of 4 childless years. Only the preacher dared speak, his voice quavering. "Mr. Keller, please, this is still God's house. God's house doesn't shelter those who defy his command to be fruitful," the old man's voice cracked across the cemetery. "Everyone knows why Thomas died without an heir. The Keller name dies with him because of her." Katherine's trembling hand clutched her black mourning dress as whispers rippled through the crowd. Spring of 1878 in Ordway was proving as cruel as the winter that had preceded it. "Katherine," Martha Wheeler whispered, the only friend brave enough to stand beside her, "come away now." But Katherine's feet remained rooted beside her husband's casket. "He was my husband. Not anymore." Old man Keller spat on the ground. "You have until sundown to clear out of the house. It belongs to the Keller family, and you were never truly part of it." Something inside Katherine hardened like iron in a blacksmith's forge. She'd spent 4 years enduring the whispers, the sidelong glances, the prayers offered for her condition, the suggestions of herbs and tinctures that might open her womb. 4 years of monthly disappointments and Thomas's increasingly distant affection. Very well. She lifted her chin despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "I've packed my things already." It wasn't a lie. She'd known this was coming from the moment the mine foreman had appeared at her door 3 days ago, hat in hand. As the crowd dispersed, Katherine stood alone at the grave until the gravediggers grew uncomfortable with her presence. Only then did she walk the mile to what had been her home, each step taking her further from the life she'd known and toward an uncertain future. Martha was waiting on the porch, a wagon loaded with Katherine's meager possessions. "You can stay with us until you decide what to do next." Katherine shook her head. "Your husband sits on the town council with Elder Keller. I won't bring his wrath down on your family, too." "Then where will you go?" The question hung in the air as Katherine gazed down Ordway's main street. The mining town had boomed in the past decade, bringing prosperity to some and hardship to many. For a woman alone, the options were few and mostly disreputable. "The stagecoach leaves for Denver tomorrow," Katherine said finally. "I have enough saved for passage." Martha's eyes widened. "Denver." "But it's dangerous for a woman alone." "More dangerous than here." Katherine's laugh held no humor. "Where I'm the woman cursed by God, where children are told not to catch my eye lest my barrenness spread to them like a disease." Martha couldn't argue with that. The superstitions had grown worse over the years, with some women crossing the street rather than pass Katherine on the boardwalk. "Take this, at least." Martha pressed a small cloth pouch into Katherine's hand. "It's not much, but it might help you get established somewhere." Katherine felt the weight of coins and tried to return it. "I can't." "You can and you will." Martha's normally gentle eyes flashed. "Not everyone in Ordway believes the nonsense they speak about you." That night, Katherine slept in the small room above the general store where Mr. Peterson had grudgingly allowed her to stay, though he'd charged her double the usual rate, on account of the risk to his reputation. She lay awake staring at the water stains on the ceiling, wondering what fate awaited her in Denver. A position as a shopgirl, perhaps, or a seamstress if her skills were deemed adequate. Certainly not marriage again, not with her affliction. The stagecoach arrived at dawn, already half full with miners headed to try their luck in larger claims. Katherine boarded with her single trunk, ignoring the curious glances of her fellow passengers. As the coach lurched forward, she refused to look back at the town that had been her home since she'd arrived as a hopeful 18-year-old bride. 3 days later, covered in dust and exhausted, Katherine descended from the coach in Denver to find a city both exhilarating and terrifying in its scope. Buildings rose 3 and 4 stories high, streets teemed with horses and wagons, and so many people hurried about their business without a glance at the newcomer in their midst. The boarding house she found was clean but sparse, catering to working women with strict rules against male visitors and a curfew that would have suited a convent. Katherine used her small cache of funds to purchase appropriate clothing for job hunting, and spent 2 weeks traveling from shop to shop, office to office, only to be told repeatedly that positions had just been filled or that they weren't hiring. Her funds dwindling, Katherine was sitting in a small cafe nursing a cup of coffee when she overheard 2 women at the next table. "The advertisement specifically requested women who can read and write," said the older woman. "Apparently this cattle baron out in Silverdale needs someone to teach his daughter and help with correspondence. Pays room and board plus $20 a month." "Silverdale," the younger woman scoffed. "That's hardly more than an outpost. I'd rather take my chances here than be stranded in the wilderness." Katherine's heart quickened. She had completed 8 years of schooling before her marriage, more education than most women received. $20 a month was a respectable wage, and room and board would eliminate her most pressing expense. "Excuse me," she interjected, turning to the women. "This position you mentioned, where might one apply?" The older woman looked Katherine up and down. "Watson's Employment Agency on Lawrence Street. But I warn you, girl, Silverdale's rough country. 3 days' ride west of here and nothing but ranches and a trading post." "Thank you," Katherine replied, already calculating how much of her remaining money she would need for the journey. The next morning found her at Watson's Employment Agency, a cramped office smelling of pipe tobacco and furniture polish. Mr. Watson himself, a portly man with spectacles perched on his nose, reviewed her credentials with skepticism. "You're educated enough, Mrs. Keller, but have you any experience with children? Mr. Hudson is quite particular about his daughter's upbringing." "I helped teach Sunday school in Ordway," Katherine offered. "It wasn't much, but it was the truth. And I'm patient and firm when necessary." Mr. Watson made notes on his paper. "And why are you traveling alone? Your husband is deceased," Katherine interrupted. "I am a widow seeking respectable employment." The employment agent studied her for a moment before nodding. "Very well, the stage to Silverdale leaves tomorrow morning. Mr. Hudson's ranch hand will meet arrivals. I'll provide a letter of introduction." That night, Katherine wrote to Martha, providing her Denver address and explaining her new position. She didn't know if she would ever receive a reply, but it felt important to leave a trail, some evidence that Katherine Keller still existed in the world. The journey to Silverdale proved even more grueling than the trip to Denver. The roads deteriorated from rutted dirt to mere suggestions of a path as they traveled west. By the time the stagecoach rolled into the dusty settlement that called itself Silverdale, Katherine was sore in places she hadn't known could be sore, and a fine layer of dust coated everything she owned. Silverdale consisted of one main street with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses. No church steeple dominated the skyline here, just the vast expanse of sky and distant mountains that made Katherine feel smaller than she'd ever felt before. Mrs. Keller. A tall man approached as she descended from the coach. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could see he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps early 30s. "I'm Hank Preston from the Double H Ranch," Katherine nodded, trying to mask her exhaustion. "Yes, Mr. Preston, I'm expected." "Yes, madam. Mr. Hudson sent me to collect you." He reached for her trunk. "Let me help with your belongings." Something in his manner, respectful but not deferential, told Katherine that Hank Preston was more than an ordinary ranch hand. He loaded her trunk into a wagon and offered his hand to help her up to the seat. "It's another hour to the ranch," he explained as he clicked to the horses. "Hope you don't mind the ride after your journey." "I'll manage, thank you," Katherine replied, too tired for more conversation. As they left the small settlement behind, the landscape opened up into rolling grasslands dotted with cattle. The double H, Hank explained when she finally asked, ran over 5,000 head of cattle on 30,000 acres. Mr. Hudson had come west 20 years earlier with nothing and built one of the largest operations in the territory. And Mrs. Hudson, Katherine ventured, a shadow crossed Hank's face, died in childbirth 10 years ago. Emma, that's Mr. Hudson's daughter, has had a series of governesses, but none seem to last. I see. Katherine fell silent, wondering what she had gotten herself into. The ranch house, when they finally arrived, was far more impressive than she had expected. A two-story structure of sturdy logs with glass windows and a wide porch. Several outbuildings and a large barn completed the central compound, with bunkhouses for the ranch hands set a short distance away. Mr. Hudson's in Colorado Springs on business, Hank explained as he carried her trunk up the steps. He'll return in 3 days. Until then, Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper, will show you your duties, Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who eyed Katherine with the same suspicion Mr. Watson had. Your room is upstairs, next to Miss Emma's, she explained, leading Katherine through the house. Meals are at 6, noon and 6. Miss Emma's lessons begin at 8 and continue until 4 with a break for the noon meal. Mr. Hudson expects you to join them for supper when he's in residence. And where is Miss Emma now? Katherine asked, wondering about her new charge. Mrs. Abernathy's lips thinned. Where she shouldn't be, most likely. That child has the run of this place when Mr. Hudson's away. As if summoned by the conversation, the front door banged open and a whirlwind in the form of a 10-year-old girl burst into the house. Her dark hair escaped from its braid, her dress was mud-splattered, and her eyes were alive with mischief. Mrs. Abernathy, Caleb says the new filly. She stopped short when she saw Katherine. Who are you? This is Mrs. Keller, your new governess, Mrs. Abernathy said. Mrs. Keller, this is Miss Emma Hudson, Katherine smiled. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Emma. The girl's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You won't last, none of them do. Emma, Mrs. Abernathy scolded. Mind your manners, but Katherine wasn't offended. Perhaps I'll surprise you, she said mildly. I'm quite determined. Emma studied her for a moment before shrugging. We'll see. She turned back to Mrs. Abernathy. Caleb says I can watch the new filly if I finish my chores. Can I go after supper? May I? Katherine corrected automatically. Emma rolled her eyes. May I go after supper, please? Mrs. Abernathy sighed. If Mr. Preston approves, I suppose so. Now go wash up. As Emma thundered up the stairs, Mrs. Abernathy turned to Katherine. That child needs a firm hand, Mrs. Keller. Her father indulges her too much since her mother passed. Katherine nodded, but she had seen something in Emma's eyes that resonated with her, a defiance born of loss and uncertainty. Perhaps they would understand each other better than anyone expected. The next morning, Katherine rose early and dressed carefully in her plainest but neatest dress. She had spent the evening reviewing the schoolbooks in the small classroom that occupied one corner of the house and preparing lessons for her first day with Emma. The girl arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, hair neatly braided, wearing a clean dress, but with a mutinous expression that suggested this conformity was temporary at best. Good morning, Miss Emma, Katherine greeted her. Shall we begin with arithmetic today? Emma slumped into her chair. I hate arithmetic. I see, and what subject do you prefer? The question seemed to surprise the girl. Geography, she admitted after a moment. I like knowing about other places, Katherine smiled. Then perhaps we could begin with geography and move to arithmetic after you've had a chance to show me what you know about the world. It was the right approach. Emma's knowledge of geography was impressive for her age, and her enthusiasm as she pointed out locations on the classroom's large wall map gave Katherine insight into a bright mind that needed proper channeling. By lunchtime, they had covered not just geography, but had made substantial progress in arithmetic as well, with Katherine discovering that Emma's resistance stemmed mainly from a lack of confidence rather than aptitude. You've done very well today, Katherine told her as they prepared to break for lunch. Tomorrow we'll continue with these subjects and add some literature as well. Emma looked at her curiously. You're different from the others. How so? You don't treat me like I'm stupid when I get something wrong, and you don't keep talking about finding me a husband someday like that's all I'm good for." Katherine felt a pang of sympathy. "There are many paths a woman can take in life, Emma. Marriage is just one of them." "Is that why you're here, because you chose a different path?" The innocent question struck at Katherine's deepest wound. "No," she said softly. "I was married, but my husband died. Like my mother," Emma nodded sagely. "That's why you understand, isn't it, what it's like to be different?" Before Katherine could respond, Mrs. Abernathy called them for lunch, and the moment passed. But Katherine found herself pondering Emma's perception throughout the afternoon. Did her loss and subsequent ostracism show so clearly? Or was it simply that this child, also marked by loss, recognized something familiar in her new teacher? The next 2 days established a routine. Mornings were devoted to lessons, afternoons to Emma's chores around the ranch and Katherine's preparation for the next day's teaching. In the evenings after supper, Katherine often found herself on the porch, watching the sunset paint the vast Colorado sky in colors she'd never seen in Ordway's mining dust-filled air. It was during one such evening that Hank Preston joined her, his tall figure appearing silently beside the porch railing where she sat. "Mind some company, Mrs. Keller?" he asked, hat in hand. "Not at all, Mr. Preston." She gestured to the empty chair beside her. He sat, stretching long legs before him. "Emma seems to be taking to you better than her previous teachers." "She's a bright child," Katherine replied, "and not nearly as difficult as I was led to believe." Hank's chuckle was low and warm. "She can be a handful when she sets her mind to it." "But you found the key: treat her like a person with thoughts worth hearing, not just a problem to be managed." Katherine studied him in the fading light. His features were strong rather than handsome, weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held an intelligence that belied any notion that he was a simple cowhand. "You seem to know Emma well," she observed. "I've been with the Double H since before she was born," he explained. "Came on as a ranch hand when I was 20, worked my way up to foreman, watched Emma grow up." A shadow crossed his face. "Was here when we lost Mrs. Hudson. That must have been difficult for everyone." Hank nodded, his gaze on the distant mountains. "Daniel Mr. Hudson hasn't been the same since. Throws himself into the ranch, building it bigger, more successful. Sometimes I think he forgets Emma isn't just another asset to manage." The conversation shifted to lighter topics: the operations of the ranch, the upcoming cattle drive, the changes Silverdale had seen in the decades since Hank had arrived. Katherine found herself laughing at his dry observations about local characters and relaxing in a way she hadn't since Thomas's death. "I should bid you good night," she said finally, realizing the sky had darkened to indigo. "Mr. Hudson returns tomorrow, and I want to ensure Emma is prepared to demonstrate her progress." Hank stood when she did, replacing his hat. "Daniel's a fair man, Mrs. Keller, demanding but fair. Show him you can handle Emma and you'll have no problems here." His words proved prophetic the next day when Daniel Hudson arrived home shortly before supper. Katherine's first impression was of a man whose physical presence commanded attention, tall like his foreman, but broader, with a face that might have been handsome before grief had carved permanent lines around his mouth and eyes. "Mrs. Keller," he greeted her formally in his study, where he'd summoned her immediately upon arrival. "I trust my daughter hasn't driven you to distraction yet." "Not at all, Mr. Hudson," Katherine replied. "Emma is bright and eager to learn when approached properly." He raised an eyebrow. "Is she now? That's not what her previous governess reported." "Perhaps Miss Emma and I understand each other," Katherine suggested. "We've made excellent progress in arithmetic and geography, and tomorrow we'll begin more intensive work on her composition skills." Daniel Hudson studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I'll reserve judgment until I've observed for myself. You'll join us for supper, of course." It wasn't a question, so Katherine simply inclined her head in acceptance. "Of course." Supper proved to be a more formal affair than the meals she'd shared with Emma and Mrs. Abernathy. The dining room table was set with fine china and silver, and Hank Preston joined them as well, now dressed in a clean shirt and vest rather than his working clothes. Emma, to Catherine's surprise, was on her best behavior, answering her father's questions about her studies with enthusiasm that seemed genuine rather than affected. "Mrs. Keller says my essays show promise," she informed her father, "and she's teaching me about proper citation of sources." Daniel's eyes flicked to Catherine. "Impressive. Most governesses focus on penmanship and moral instruction. Both important," Catherine acknowledged, "but Emma has a curious mind. I believe she would benefit from learning to research and form well-supported arguments." "For what purpose?" Daniel asked, though his tone held more curiosity than challenge. "She'll hardly need academic writing as a rancher's wife." Catherine felt Emma's eyes on her and chose her words carefully. "Education serves many purposes beyond practical application, Mr. Hudson. It teaches one to think clearly, to question assumptions, to understand the world. These are valuable skills regardless of one's path in life." Across the table, Hank's mouth quirked in what might have been a suppressed smile. Daniel considered her words, then nodded. "Fair enough, Mrs. Keller. Continue as you see fit. I'll review Emma's progress at the end of each month." Later, as Catherine prepared for bed, she reflected that her first encounter with her employer had gone better than expected. If she could maintain Emma's interest and demonstrate consistent progress, this position might provide the stability she desperately needed. What she hadn't counted on was the way Silverdale and the Double H would begin to feel like home over the coming weeks. Emma's initial wariness gave way to genuine attachment, and Catherine found herself looking forward to their daily lessons and the girls' increasingly insightful questions. Mrs. Abernathy, too, gradually warmed to her, particularly after Catherine offered to help with mending in the evenings, a skill at which she excelled. "You've a deft hand with a needle," the housekeeper observed one evening as they sat by the fire. "Shame you never had children of your own to sew for." The comment, innocent as it was, reopened the wound Catherine had been trying to heal. "Yes," she said quietly. "A shame." Mrs. Abernathy must have heard something in her voice, for she looked up sharply. "I've spoken out of turn. Forgive me." Catherine shook her head. "There's nothing to forgive. It's simply a difficult subject." "You're young yet," Mrs. Abernathy said kindly. "Plenty of time to find another husband, start a family." Catherine said nothing, returning her attention to the shirt she was mending. How could she explain that it wasn't just the loss of Thomas that had brought her to Silverdale, but the cruel judgment of an entire community? That the very mention of children reminded her of her failure as a woman in the eyes of society. Her silence must have communicated something, for Mrs. Abernathy changed the subject, launching into a story about the early days of the Double H that had Catherine laughing despite herself. June brought warmer weather, and the busiest season at the ranch. The cattle drive to the railhead would depart in early July, and preparations consumed everyone's attention. Even Emma's lessons were adjusted to accommodate the rhythm of ranch life, with more time spent outdoors observing and participating in the work that sustained them all. Catherine found herself drawn into this world in unexpected ways. Daniel Hudson, impressed with her organizational abilities, asked her to help with the ranch's correspondence and record-keeping in addition to teaching Emma. The extra work meant more interaction with Hank Preston, as foreman and governess coordinated on matters related to the upcoming drive. "You've become indispensable," Hank commented one afternoon as they reviewed supply lists in the ranch office. "Daniel's never trusted anyone with the books before." Catherine looked up, surprised. Surely his previous governesses were here to teach Emma, nothing more, Hank finished. "You've become part of the operation, Mrs. Keller." The way he said her name with a warmth that had grown over their weeks of acquaintance sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Catherine," she said impulsively, "when we're not in front of the others, you might call me Catherine." His smile transformed his weathered face. "Catherine," he repeated, "then you must call me Hank." It was a small thing, this exchange of names, but it marked a shift in their relationship. In the days that followed, Catherine found herself looking forward to their interactions. the brief moments when their hands would brush as they exchanged papers, the shared glances when Emma said something particularly precocious. One evening in late June, Katherine was returning from a walk to the creek that bordered the ranch when she encountered Hank riding back from checking the herd. "Beautiful evening," he commented, dismounting to walk beside her. "It is," she agreed, breathing deeply of the sage-scented air. "I never imagined such open spaces existed when I lived in Ordway." "Ordway," he repeated. "That's the mining town near Pikes Peak, isn't it? What brought you from there to Silverdale?" Katherine hesitated. She had never spoken of her past since arriving at the Double H, preferring to leave those painful memories behind. But something about Hank's steady presence made her want to unburden herself. "Necessity," she said finally. "After my husband died, I had nowhere else to go." Hank nodded, leading his horse by the reins as they walked. "I'm sorry for your loss, thank you." She paused, then added, "But it wasn't just his death that drove me away, it was everything that came after." "What do you mean?" Katherine stared at the distant mountains, gathering courage. "I was married for 4 years, and in all that time I never conceived a child. In a small town like Ordway, that marks a woman. After Thomas died, his father," her voice caught. "His father publicly disowned me at the funeral, called me barren, said I'd failed as a wife." She expected awkward silence, perhaps embarrassment at her revelation. Instead, Hank stopped walking, his expression darkening with anger. "That's unconscionable," he said, his voice low and fierce. "To judge a woman's worth by whether she bears children as if that's all she is." The unexpected vehemence of his response brought tears to Katherine's eyes. "The whole town believed it. Women wouldn't let their children near me, as if infertility were contagious. Men looked at me with pity or contempt. Even the preacher suggested I must have some secret sin for God to withhold his blessing." "That's not God talking," Hank said firmly. "That's human cruelty masquerading as righteousness." They had reached the ranch yard, and Katherine knew they couldn't continue such a personal conversation where others might overhear. "Thank you," she said simply, "for understanding." Hank's expression softened. "Katherine," he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "Don't let the ignorance of others define you, not here, not ever again." With that, he tipped his hat and led his horse toward the stables, leaving Katherine with a lightened heart and a dangerous spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. The next morning, Katherine was reviewing Emma's composition when Daniel Hudson entered the classroom, his expression grave. "Mrs. Keller, might I have a word?" he asked, gesturing to the hallway. Emma looked between them with alarm. "Did I do something wrong, Pa?" "No, sweetheart. Continue your work. I just need to speak with Mrs. Keller privately." Outside in the hallway, Daniel's stern expression sent a chill through Katherine. "Is something amiss with my teaching, Mr. Hudson?" "Not at all," he assured her quickly. "Your work has been exemplary, this is a more delicate matter." He cleared his throat. "It's come to my attention that you and Mr. Preston have been engaged in private conversations of an increasingly personal nature." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Preston has been nothing but respectful." Daniel held up a hand. "I'm not accusing either of you of impropriety, Mrs. Keller, but I must consider appearances. You are a widow in my employ, responsible for my daughter's education and moral guidance. Hank is my foreman and right-hand man. Any attachment between you could complicate matters considerably." "I assure you there is no attachment," Katherine said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "We are merely friendly colleagues." Daniel studied her face. "I hope that remains the case for everyone's sake. The last thing this ranch needs is the distraction of a romance, particularly with the cattle drive approaching." "I understand," Katherine said stiffly, mortified at being addressed like a lovesick girl rather than a grown woman. "Good," Daniel nodded. "That's all I wanted to say on the matter." As he walked away, Katherine stood frozen in the hallway, humiliation and anger warring within her. Was she to be denied even the simple pleasure of friendship because of others' assumptions? Had she escaped one prison of judgment only to enter another? The answer came that evening when Hank sought her out as she sat alone on the porch, watching the fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. Daniel spoke to you, he said without preamble, settling into the chair beside her. Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. He spoke to me as well. Hank's voice held a thread of amusement that surprised her. Warned me not to distract his governess with inappropriate attentions. It's ridiculous, Katherine burst out, as if we're children who can't maintain professional boundaries. Is it ridiculous? Hank asked quietly. Katherine, I've never hidden my admiration for you. Your intelligence, your kindness with Emma, your strength in the face of what you've endured, how could I not be drawn to you? Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward. Hank, I know, he interrupted gently. You came here for a fresh start, not to complicate your life with a ranch foreman's attentions. And I respect that. I just wanted you to know that Daniel wasn't imagining things, at least not on my part. Katherine turned to face him fully, seeing in the fading light the sincerity in his eyes. It's not that, she said finally. It's everything else, my past, the fact that I can't. She couldn't bring herself to say the words, understanding dawned in his expression. You think because you couldn't have children with your first husband that makes you somehow less valuable as a woman. Put so plainly, it sounded absurd, yet it was precisely what she'd been taught to believe. Any man would want children, she said softly. A family. Any man worth having would want you, Katherine, exactly as you are. Hank's voice was firm, but I won't press you. I just wanted you to know where I stand. The rest is up to you. He rose and walked away before she could respond, leaving Katherine with thoughts more turbulent than the gathering storm clouds on the horizon. The following week brought the final preparations for the cattle drive. Daniel would lead the drive himself, along with most of the ranch hands, while Hank remained behind to manage the ranch operations. The evening before their departure, Daniel held a barbecue for the entire ranch, a tradition before each year's drive. Under the stars, with fiddle music from one of the hands and lanterns casting a golden glow over trestle tables laden with food, the atmosphere was festive despite the hard work that lay ahead. Katherine found herself relaxing, dancing with several of the hands when they asked, and even teaching Emma a simple waltz while the others clapped in time. You dance well, Mrs. Keller, Daniel observed when she returned to the table where he sat with Hank. Another hidden talent. Hardly hidden, she replied with a smile, just rarely used these days. You should have more opportunities, Daniel said, surprising her. Hank, why don't you ask Mrs. Keller to dance? I know you're not leaving with the drive, but surely you deserve some celebration too. It was an unexpected olive branch from the man who had warned them both against exactly this kind of interaction. Katherine glanced at Hank, who looked equally surprised but rose immediately, extending his hand. Would you honor me with a dance, Mrs. Keller? She placed her hand in his, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at his touch. I'd be delighted, Mr. Preston. The fiddler had shifted to a slower tune, and as Hank led her in a simple two-step, Katherine was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the respectful distance he maintained between them, and the eyes of others watching their interaction. Daniel's changed his mind about us, Hank murmured, low enough that only she could hear. What do you mean? He came to me yesterday, said he'd been thinking about what makes a ranch successful, said it wasn't just the cattle or the land, but the people. And that he'd never seen Emma so happy as she's been since you arrived. Katherine glanced toward the table where Emma sat with Mrs. Abernathy, the girl's animated chatter bringing smiles to those around her. She's a remarkable child. She is, Hank agreed. And Daniel finally realized that your influence has been good for her. More than that, I think he's recognized that happiness is too rare to be sacrificed to appearances. The implications of his words hung between them as they continued to dance, the music wrapping around them like a tangible thing. When the song ended, Hank didn't immediately release her hand, his eyes holding a question Katherine wasn't ready to answer. Thank you for the dance, Mr. Preston, she said formally, conscious of others nearby. He inclined his head, understanding her reticence. The pleasure was mine, Mrs. Keller. The cattle drive departed at dawn the next morning, with Daniel leading 50 men and 3,000 cattle on the long journey to the railhead. With the ranch suddenly quieter, Katherine found herself with more responsibilities as Hank took over the day-to-day management of operations. Emma, too, seemed to flourish in the absence of her father's, sometimes stern presence. Her lessons continued, but Katherine incorporated more practical applications using the ranch's ledgers for arithmetic practice, studying the geography of the cattle drive route, writing compositions about ranch life. "I want to learn to ride better," Emma announced one afternoon as they concluded their lessons. "Like a real rancher, not side-saddle like a lady," Katherine hesitated. "Your father might not approve, Pa won't know unless someone tells him," Emma pointed out. "And Hank already said he'd teach me if you agreed." "Did he now?" Katherine tried to sound stern, but her lips twitched with amusement. "And when did you discuss this with Mr. Preston?" "This morning when he was checking on Starlight's foal," Emma replied with the straightforward honesty that was her hallmark. "He said you'd probably say no because you're too proper, but I told him you're not as proper as you pretend to be." Katherine laughed despite herself. "And what makes you think I'm not proper, young lady?" Emma's expression turned serious. "Because you listen to me, really listen like what I think matters. That's not proper, that's real." The simple observation struck Katherine deeply. Perhaps Emma had identified something important: the distinction between propriety for its own sake and genuine connection with others. "Very well," she said finally. "You may learn to ride properly, but only if I'm present during the lessons." Emma's whoop of joy brought Mrs. Abernathy from the kitchen, shaking her head at the girl's enthusiasm but smiling nonetheless. The riding lessons became a highlight of their afternoons. Hank proved to be a patient teacher, first with Emma and then, to Katherine's surprise, with her as well. "You sit a horse like you're afraid it will shatter beneath you," he teased gently as Katherine perched awkwardly in the saddle of the gentle mare he'd selected for her. "Relax your back, feel the horse's movement." "I hardly rode at all in Ordway," she admitted. Thomas wasn't interested in such pursuits. Something flashed in Hank's eyes, perhaps displeasure at the mention of her late husband, but he merely adjusted her posture with careful hands. "Your Thomas missed out then. You have a natural grace that will serve you well once you gain confidence." By the end of July, Katherine found herself enjoying their rides across the ranch property, discovering places of beauty she would never have seen otherwise: a hidden spring surrounded by wildflowers, a grove of aspens whose leaves danced in the slightest breeze, a ridge that offered views all the way to the distant mountains. It was on one such ride, while Emma raced ahead on her pony, that Hank finally broached the subject they'd been circling for weeks. "Katherine," he began, guiding his horse closer to hers, "I've respected your need for time and space. But I can't help feeling there's something growing between us that deserves acknowledgement." She met his gaze, no longer trying to deny the truth. "There is," she admitted quietly, "but I'm afraid, Hank." "Of what?" "Of wanting something I may not be able to have. Of disappointing you in the ways that matter most." Understanding softened his features. "If you're referring to children, I am." The words spilled out in a rush. "I couldn't give Thomas an heir. His family cast me out for it. The entire town judged me for it. How can I let myself care for you knowing I might face that rejection again?" Hank reined his horse to a stop, forcing Katherine to do the same. He reached across the space between them to take her hand. "Katherine Keller, listen to me carefully. I don't want you because you might bear children. I want you because of who you are: your mind, your heart, your spirit. If children come, they're a blessing. If they don't, you remain a blessing in my life that I never expected to find." Tears blurred her vision. "You say that now, and I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives if you'll let me." His grip on her hand tightened. "I love you, Katherine, not for what you might give me, but for who you already are." The declaration hung in the air between them, as vast and important as the Colorado sky above. Before Katherine could respond, Emma's shout drew their attention. She'd found a calf separated from its mother and needed help returning it to the herd. The moment passed, but something had shifted irrevocably. That night, as Katherine prepared for bed, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Mrs. Abernathy, her usual practical expression softened with concern. "May I come in?" the housekeeper asked. Catherine stepped aside, curious about this unusual late-night visit. Mrs. Abernathy settled on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. "I've worked for the Hudson family for 15 years," she began. "Seen a lot of comings and goings, seen joy and heartbreak. And I've come to care about this family as if it were my own." "I understand," Catherine said, uncertain where this was leading. "That includes you now," Mrs. Abernathy continued, "and Hank, who's been like a son to Daniel since he joined the ranch. So I hope you'll forgive an old woman for speaking plainly." Catherine nodded, a flutter of apprehension in her chest. "I see how it is between you two," Mrs. Abernathy said gently, "and I see how you hold yourself back. Emma let slip some of what happened to you in Ordway, not the details, mind you, but enough for me to understand." "She shouldn't have. That child loves you," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. "She wants you to be happy, we all do, and Hank Preston is a good man, Catherine. The kind who doesn't come along often in a woman's life." Catherine sank onto the chair by her dressing table. "I know he is. That's what makes this so difficult. Because you're afraid you can't give him children." Mrs. Abernathy's directness was startling. "Child, has it occurred to you that the problem might not have been with you at all?" Catherine stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean that men are quick to blame women for childlessness, but sometimes the fault lies with them. Your Thomas, was his family known for having many children?" "No," Catherine said slowly, thinking back. "Thomas was an only child. His father had a brother, but he never married." "And did Thomas's mother have other children before or after him?" "No, just Thomas." Mrs. Abernathy nodded as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "Yet they blamed you entirely, without considering it might be the Keller men who carried the problem." The possibility had never occurred to Catherine, so thoroughly had she accepted society's judgment. "Even if that were true, it doesn't change the fact that I might still never have children." "No, it doesn't," Mrs. Abernathy agreed, "but it might change how you think about yourself. You're not cursed or deficient, Catherine. You're a woman who had the misfortune to marry into a family that couldn't accept their own shortcomings." She rose to leave, pausing at the door. "Just something to consider before you let fear steal a second chance at happiness." Sleep eluded Catherine that night as she turned Mrs. Abernathy's words over in her mind. Could it be true? Had she spent years blaming herself for something that was never her fault? And even if she accepted that possibility, did it change her situation with Hank? Dawn found her still wrestling with these questions. She went through the morning routine mechanically, setting Emma to her studies while her own thoughts remained in turmoil. By mid-afternoon, she knew she needed to clear her head before she could face Hank again. "I'm going for a ride," she told Mrs. Abernathy after lunch. "Emma has reading to complete. I won't be long." The housekeeper nodded, something knowing in her eyes. "Take your time. Sometimes the open air brings clarity." Catherine rode without a specific destination, letting the mare choose the path as she tried to sort through her tangled emotions. The land spread out around her, vast and indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow comforting in its permanence. She had reached a decision by the time she turned the horse back toward the ranch. Whatever happened with Hank, whether they had children or not, she would no longer define herself by what she lacked. Ordway and the Kellers had taken enough from her. She wouldn't let them take this chance at happiness too. As the ranch buildings came into view, Catherine noticed unusual activity, several riders approaching from the east, still some distance away but clearly headed for the Double H. One rode ahead of the others, his horse at a gallop. It was only when the lead rider drew closer that she recognized Daniel Hudson, returning weeks earlier than expected from the cattle drive. Something was wrong, she could tell from the urgency of his approach and the set of his shoulders. She urged her mare forward, reaching the ranch yard just as Daniel dismounted, his face grim with exhaustion and what looked like pain. "Mr. Hudson," she called, sliding from her saddle. "What's happened? Is everyone all right?" He turned at her voice, relief flashing briefly across his features. "Mrs. Keller, thank God, where's Emma?" With Mrs. Abernathy doing her studies. "What's wrong?" Before he could answer, Hank emerged from the barn, alerted by the commotion. "Daniel, what are you doing back so soon?" Daniel grimaced, and Katherine noticed for the first time that he held his left arm awkwardly against his side. "Rustlers hit us 3 days out," he explained tersely. "Lost about 500 head, 2 men injured besides myself. I left the drive in Jones's hands and brought the wounded back." Hank's expression darkened. "How bad are they?" "Cooper took a bullet in the shoulder. Reynolds got thrown and broke his leg. I caught one in the side clean through, but it needs proper tending." "I'll fetch the doctor from town," Katherine said immediately, turning back toward her horse. "No need," Daniel stopped her. "Doc Miller is riding with us. He's just moving slower with the injured men." Within the hour, the ranch was transformed into an impromptu hospital. The 2 injured ranch hands were settled in the bunkhouse, while Daniel, despite his protests, was confined to his bedroom under the doctor's orders. "Bullet missed anything vital," Doc Miller informed Katherine and Hank as he emerged from examining Daniel. "But he's lost blood and the wound needs watching for infection. He'll need rest for at least 2 weeks. He won't like that," Hank observed, his concern evident. "Not with the drive still underway." "Then you'll have to make him see sense," the doctor replied bluntly. "Unless he wants to risk becoming permanently incapacitated. Mrs. Keller, can I count on you to ensure he follows instructions?" Katherine nodded, though she wondered how much influence she truly had over her employer. "I'll do my best, doctor." The next days fell into a new routine. Emma divided her time between her studies and sitting with her father, reading to him or relating her adventures of the past weeks. Katherine maintained the household schedule and assisted with Daniel's care, changing bandages and ensuring he took the medicine Dr. Miller had left. Hank, meanwhile, was stretched thin between managing the ranch and coordinating with the men still on the cattle drive. He and Katherine had little time alone, their conversations limited to brief exchanges about Daniel's condition or Emma's progress. A week after Daniel's return, Katherine entered his room with a fresh bandage to find him sitting up in bed, reviewing papers Hank had brought him. "You're supposed to be resting," she chided gently. Daniel grimaced. "I'm tired of resting. The drive continues whether I'm there or not, and there's work to be done." "Work that can wait until you're stronger," Katherine replied, setting down her supplies. "Your wound needs cleaning." He submitted to her ministrations with poor grace, wincing as she removed the old bandage. "Has Emma finished the history assignment you gave her?" "She has, and quite well too. She has a remarkable mind for details." Pride softened Daniel's features. Like her mother, Martha could remember every conversation she ever had, every book she ever read. It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife to Katherine, and she treaded carefully. "Emma mentioned she has her mother's eyes, and her spirit," Daniel agreed. "Too much of it sometimes." Martha was headstrong, too, rode astride, insisted on helping with the ranch, never would stay in her proper place as her mother called it. His expression grew distant with memory. "I loved that about her." Katherine carefully applied the clean bandage. "She sounds remarkable." She was. Daniel's focus returned to the present, his gaze sharpening on Katherine. "Which is why I've been a fool. I don't understand. I've watched you with Emma these past months, seen how she's blossomed under your care, seen the way you've become essential to this ranch's operations." He paused. "And I've seen the way Hank looks at you the same way I once looked at Martha." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Hudson, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I tried to discourage whatever was growing between you, thinking it would complicate matters. But lying here, facing my own mortality more directly than I'd like, I've realized something important." He reached out to touch her hand, the gesture oddly paternal. "Life is too short and happiness too rare to sacrifice for the sake of appearance or convenience. If there's a chance for joy in this harsh country, one should grab it with both hands." Katherine sat very still, hardly daring to breathe. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that if Hank Preston has been foolish enough to lose his heart to you, and you feel the same, you have my blessing for whatever that's worth." A smile touched his lips. "Though I expect you to continue teaching Emma. She needs you as much as he does." The tears that had threatened spilled over then, relief and gratitude overwhelming her composure. Thank you, she whispered. Daniel squeezed her hand once before releasing it. No thanks needed, just promise me one thing. What's that? When Hank finally gets around to proposing properly and he will have the wedding here at the Double H. This place has seen too much sorrow, it could use a celebration. Katherine laughed through her tears. You're very sure of his intentions. I've known that man for 12 years, Daniel replied. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Now go find him. I believe he's in the west pasture checking on the new calves. Katherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. Rest while I'm gone, she instructed, falling back on the authority of a caretaker. Doctor's orders. Daniel waved her away, already returning to his papers. Go on, before I change my mind about being so magnanimous. The ride to the west pasture took Katherine past some of the most beautiful parts of the Double H. The grass was still green from summer rains, dotted with late blooming wildflowers. In the distance, the mountains stood sentinel against the sky, their peaks already showing hints of early snow. She found Hank exactly where Daniel had said he would be, crouched beside a newborn calf as its mother watched nervously nearby. He looked up at the sound of her approach, surprise and pleasure lighting his face. Katherine, he greeted her, rising to his feet, is everything all right? Is Daniel? He's fine, she assured him quickly. Better than fine, actually. He sent me to find you. Hank's brow furrowed. What does he need? I was planning to check the north fence line next, but if he needs something more urgent, he doesn't need anything, Katherine interrupted, gathering her courage. He just gave me some advice I thought I should act on immediately. What kind of advice? Katherine dismounted, tying her mare to a nearby post before approaching Hank. The afternoon sun caught in his hair, turning it to gold at the edges, and she was struck again by how handsome he was in his quiet, steady way. He suggested that life is too short to let happiness slip away because of fear or convention. She took a deep breath, and he's right. Understanding dawned in Hank's eyes along with a cautious hope. Katherine, I love you, she said simply. I've been afraid to admit it, afraid to want something that might be taken away, but I'm not afraid anymore. The transformation of his expression was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual at first, then blindingly bright with joy. In 2 strides he closed the distance between them, gathering her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. Say it again, he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Katherine laughed, a sound of pure happiness. I love you, Hank Preston, with all my heart. His kiss was everything she had imagined and more tender yet passionate, a promise and a claiming all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt. I was going to wait, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Wait until things settled down, until I was sure you were ready, but I can't wait another day. He took her hands in his. Katherine Keller, will you marry me, be my wife, my partner in everything? Yes, she whispered, then more strongly, yes, with all my heart. Their second kiss was interrupted by the lowing of the mother cow, impatient with these human proceedings, so close to her calf. They broke apart laughing, and Hank kept his arm around Katherine's waist as they returned to their horses. Daniel said we should have the wedding at the ranch, Katherine told him as they rode back side by side. He said the place could use a celebration. Hank shook his head in amazement, and here I was worried he'd disapprove. Apparently he's decided we're good for each other, Katherine replied with a smile, and for Emma and the ranch, he's right about that. Hank reached across to take her hand. You've brought life back to this place, Katherine, to all of us. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch. Mrs. Abernathy received it with satisfied nodding, as if her matchmaking had gone exactly according to plan. Emma's reaction was more exuberant. She threw her arms around Katherine with a squeal of delight, then peppered Hank with questions about where they would live and whether she could visit whenever she wanted. You'll still be my teacher, won't you? She asked Katherine anxiously. Of course, Katherine assured her. Nothing will change that. But other things would change, and Katherine faced them with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Moving into Hank's cabin, becoming his wife in every sense, starting a new life together, these prospects filled her with anticipation. Yet the shadow of her past still lingered, the fear that her inability to conceive might eventually dim Hank's love. The evening before their wedding, a simple affair planned for the ranch with the local minister officiating, Katherine confessed this fear as they walked along the creek. "I still worry," she admitted, "that someday you'll regret choosing a woman who may never give you children." Hank stopped, turning to face her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart ache. "Katherine, listen to me. When I was 20, my sister died in childbirth along with her baby. She was the last of my family. Since then, I've made my family where I could find it with Daniel and Emma, with the men I work alongside." He took her hands in his. "What matters to me isn't continuing some bloodline or having a son to carry my name. What matters is building a life with the woman I love. If children come, we'll welcome them with joy. If not, our life together will still be rich and full." As he spoke, Katherine felt the last of her doubts dissolving. "How did I find you?" she whispered. Hank's smile was brilliant in the fading light. "I think we found each other exactly when we needed to." Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October air crisp with the promise of winter but warmed by abundant sunshine. The ceremony took place on the ranch's front porch, decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons by Mrs. Abernathy and Emma. Katherine wore a new dress of deep blue, ordered from Denver with Daniel's assistance. As she walked from the house to where Hank waited with the minister, she felt none of the uncertainty that had plagued her first wedding. This time, she was choosing with clear eyes and an open heart. The vows were simple but profound promises to love, honor, and cherish through all the seasons of life. When Hank slipped a gold band onto her finger, a band he'd secretly commissioned from the jeweler in Silverdale, Katherine felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration that followed was joyous and unrestrained. Daniel, still moving carefully but much recovered, had arranged for fiddlers from town to provide music. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by Mrs. Abernathy and the ranch cook. Even the cowboys returning from the cattle drive, which had ultimately been successful despite the rustler attack, joined in the festivities, offering rough but sincere congratulations to their foreman and his bride. As evening fell, lanterns were lit and dancing continued under the stars. Katherine found herself passed from partner to partner, Daniel insisting on a turn despite his injury, several of the hands nervously requesting a dance with the boss's wife, and Emma demanding a special waltz just for them. But it was with Hank that she ended the night, swaying in his arms long after the official celebrations had concluded. Most of the guests had departed or retired, leaving them alone on the makeshift dance floor under a canopy of stars. "Mrs. Preston," he murmured against her hair. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," she replied, nestling closer in his embrace. "Though I suspect Emma will continue to call me Mrs. Keller during lessons to maintain some semblance of propriety." Hank chuckled. "Speaking of our living arrangements, I have a surprise for you." "Oh." Katherine looked up at him curiously. "Daniel offered us the old foreman's house on the east side of the property. It hasn't been used in years. He built the cabin I've been living in when I took over as foreman. But the house is larger, more suitable for a couple. He's had men working on it secretly for the past 2 weeks." Katherine's eyes widened. "That's why there were wagons coming and going that no one would explain." "Guilty," Hank admitted with a grin. "Would you like to see it tonight or wait until morning?" "Tonight," she decided impulsively. "If it's to be our home, I want to see it right away." They rode together on Hank's horse, Katherine seated before him in the saddle, his arms around her as he guided the animal through the darkness. The old foreman's house stood on a small rise, its newly repaired porch visible in the moonlight. Inside, Katherine discovered the extent of the renovations: fresh paint, repaired furniture, new curtains at the windows. A larger bedroom with a handsome bed dominated the back of the house, while the front room contained a stone fireplace, comfortable chairs, and bookshelves already stocked with volumes from the main house. "It's perfect," she breathed, turning a slow circle in the main room. "Absolutely perfect." There's a smaller room that could be a nursery, Hank said carefully, watching her reaction, or a study for you or whatever else we might need. Katherine crossed to him, placing her hand against his cheek. It can be both in time or neither. What matters is that it's ours. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion they had both restrained until this moment. As he lifted her in his arms to carry her to their bedroom, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last. The months that followed were the happiest of Katherine's life. She settled into a routine that balanced her teaching duties with her role as Hank's wife. Mornings were devoted to Emma's education, afternoons to helping with ranch correspondence or household matters, and evenings to building her life with Hank in their cozy home. Daniel's recovery continued steadily, and by Christmas, he was back to full strength, once again taking the reins of the ranch's overall management while Hank supervised the day-to-day operations. The partnership between the two men grew stronger than ever, with Katherine often serving as a bridge between them when their strong personalities clashed over ranch decisions. Christmas brought a celebration that rivaled the wedding in its warmth and joy. The main house was decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons, and gifts were exchanged around a towering tree cut from the foothills. Katherine had secretly crafted presents for everyone: a new shirt for Daniel, embroidered with the Double H brand, a doll with changeable dresses for Emma, and for Hank, a leather-bound journal with their names and wedding date tooled into the cover. "For your thoughts," she told him as he ran his fingers over the fine workmanship, "so you can leave a record of our life together." His gift to her was equally meaningful: a silver locket containing a small photograph of them on their wedding day, captured by a traveling photographer Daniel had arranged to visit the ranch. "So you'll always carry our beginning with you," Hank said as he fastened it around her neck. Winter settled over the ranch with a peaceful quiet that Katherine had never experienced in bustling Ordway. Snow blanketed the pastures, cattle huddled in sheltered areas, and the work of the ranch slowed to essential maintenance and care of the animals. It was during these quiet months that Katherine began to notice changes in her body: a persistent tiredness, a sensitivity to certain foods, a tenderness she had never experienced before. At first, she dismissed the symptoms as a natural adjustment to married life or perhaps a lingering winter illness. But as January turned to February, she could no longer ignore the possibility. Still, she hesitated to speak of it to Hank, fearing disappointment for them both if she were mistaken. It was Mrs. Abernathy who finally confronted her, cornering Katherine in the main house pantry one afternoon. "When are you going to tell him?" the housekeeper asked without preamble. Katherine nearly dropped the jar of preserves she was holding. "Tell who what?" "Don't play innocent with me," Mrs. Abernathy said with a knowing look. "I raised 6 children of my own before I came to work here. I know the signs." Heat flooded Katherine's face. "I'm not certain yet," she admitted, "and after everything, I don't want to raise hopes that might be dashed." Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened. "Child, that man loves you more than life itself. Whether you're carrying his baby or not won't change that. But if I'm right, and I usually am about these things, he deserves to share in the joy of it." That evening, as she and Hank sat before their fireplace, Katherine gathered her courage. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Hank set aside the bridle he'd been repairing. "What is it? You've seemed preoccupied lately." "I have been," she admitted, "because I've been noticing changes in myself." She met his gaze directly. "Hank, I think that is, I believe I might be, with child." The bridle clattered to the floor as Hank stared at her, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. "Are you sure?" "Not completely," she hastened to say, "but Mrs. Abernathy seems convinced, and she's had experience with such things." In an instant, he was kneeling before her chair, his hands gently covering hers. "Katherine," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion, "if it's true." "But even if it's not, I want you to know I know," she interrupted softly, touching his cheek. "Your love doesn't depend on this, but Hank, I think it is true. I feel different, and I haven't had my monthly courses since before Christmas." Joy transformed his face, and he gathered her into his arms with exquisite gentleness, as if she had suddenly become infinitely precious and fragile. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." The tears that spilled down Catherine's cheeks were of pure happiness. All her life, she had been told her worth as a woman was tied to her ability to bear children. She had rejected that notion, found value in herself beyond reproduction. And now, ironically, life had granted her this gift at the moment when she had stopped measuring herself by it. "I love you," she told Hank, her voice steady despite her tears. "Whatever happens, I love you." "And I love you," he replied, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted, Catherine, a home, a partnership, a love I never thought possible." This, he placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "This is beyond anything I dared hope for, but it would never be more important than you." Spring brought confirmation of what Catherine and Hank already knew in their hearts. Doc Miller, visiting the ranch to check on a hand with a broken arm, confirmed that Catherine was indeed expecting, with the baby due in late summer. The news spread through the ranch like wildfire, bringing congratulations from the hands and tearful joy from Emma, who immediately appointed herself assistant big sister to the coming baby. Daniel's reaction was perhaps the most surprising. The normally reserved rancher embraced Catherine with uncharacteristic emotion. Martha would have been so pleased, he told her, his voice gruff with feeling. She always said this place needed more children. As her body changed with the growing life inside her, Catherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The pain and humiliation she had suffered in Ordway seemed increasingly distant, like a story that had happened to someone else. One afternoon in May, as she sat on the porch of their home watching Hank work with a young horse in the nearby corral, a wagon approached flying a familiar flag, the United States Mail. The driver, a stranger to Catherine, pulled up at the main house first, then made his way to the foreman's house with several letters in hand. "Mrs. Preston," he called, tipping his hat. "Mail for you." Catherine accepted the letters with thanks, puzzled by who might be writing to her. The first was from a catalog company in Denver where she'd placed an order for baby items. But the second bore the unmistakable handwriting of Martha Wheeler from Ordway. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. "Dearest Catherine, I pray this letter finds you well. It has taken months for your letter to reach me, as the postmaster initially refused to deliver it, claiming you had no right to correspondence from respectable citizens. Only when my William threatened legal action did he relent. So much has happened since you left us." Old man Keller passed on 3 months after Thomas's funeral. His mine holdings were sold to pay debts no one knew he had. The town has changed too. A new preacher arrived who speaks more of love than judgment, and slowly the poison of gossip has begun to recede. But the most important news is this: you've been vindicated, though too late for justice to be properly served. Thomas's cousin Mary came to town with her husband and 3 healthy children. When she heard how you had been treated, she revealed a family secret that no Keller man had ever fathered a child. Her own mother, she said, had conceived her through an arrangement with another man, with her father's knowledge and approval. It seems the Keller men have always been incapable of fathering children, yet blamed their wives for the family's lack of heirs. The news has caused quite a scandal, I assure you. Many who treated you most cruelly now hang their heads in shame. The preacher even dedicated a sermon to the sin of false judgment, though he named no names. I write not to reopen old wounds, my dear friend, but to close them. You were wronged grievously by this town and by the Keller family. I hope that knowing the truth provides some measure of peace. Please write again when you can. I would dearly love to know how you fare in your new life. With enduring friendship, Martha Wheeler. Catherine sat motionless, the letter trembling in her hands as tears blurred her vision. All those years of shame and self-doubt, of wondering what flaw in her had prevented conception, and the answer had been so simple, so cruelly hidden. "Catherine," Hank's voice broke through her thoughts as he approached, concern evident in his expression. "What is it? Bad news?" She handed him the letter wordlessly, watching as he read it with growing indignation. When he finished, he crouched beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Those bastards," he said with quiet fury. "To let you believe it doesn't matter anymore," Katherine interrupted gently. "That life is behind me. This," she guided his hand to the swell of her belly where their child grew. "This is what matters now." Hank's expression softened. "You're right, but I can't help wishing I could have spared you those years of pain." "If things had been different, we might never have met," Katherine pointed out. "I might never have come to Silverdale, never found the double H, never found you." She placed her hand against his cheek. "I wouldn't change a thing if it meant risking what we have now." He turned his head to kiss her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "Have I told you today how much I love you, Katherine Preston?" She smiled through her tears. "You have, but I never tire of hearing it." That night, as they lay in bed together, Katherine rested in the circle of Hank's arms, his hand protectively covering the place where their child grew. The letter from Martha had brought closure to a chapter of her life she had tried to leave behind. But more than that, it had affirmed the truth she had gradually come to accept, that her value as a woman, as a human being, had never depended on her ability to bear children. "What shall we name the baby?" Hank murmured sleepily against her hair. Katherine considered for a moment. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him Daniel, after the man who brought us together." "And if it's a girl," Katherine smiled in the darkness. "Hope," she said softly, "because that's what she'll represent, not just the hope of new life, but the hope that comes from finding love when all seemed lost." Hank's arms tightened around her. "Hope Preston," he tested the name. "It's perfect." As July's heat settled over the ranch, Katherine's preparations for the baby intensified. The small room adjoining their bedroom was transformed into a nursery, with a crib crafted by Hank himself and a rocking chair that Daniel had unexpectedly gifted them, the same chair his wife had used to rock Emma as an infant. Emma threw herself into the preparations with characteristic enthusiasm, helping to sew tiny garments and offering opinions on every aspect of baby care, despite having no practical experience in the matter. Her attachment to Katherine had only grown since the wedding, and she spent as much time at the foreman's house as Daniel would allow. "You're going to be a wonderful big sister," Katherine told her one afternoon as they folded newly laundered baby clothes. "This little one is lucky to have you." Emma beamed with pride. "Pa says the same thing. He says I can help teach the baby all sorts of things, like how to ride and how to identify different birds and plants." "That will be wonderful," Katherine agreed, hiding her amusement at the thought of an infant on horseback. "But first, the baby will need simpler lessons: how to smile, how to talk, how to walk." "I can help with those too," Emma declared confidently. Then, her expression growing serious, she added, "Mrs. Keller, Mrs. Preston, can I ask you something important?" "Of course." "Will you still have time for my lessons after the baby comes? Mrs. Abernathy says babies take up all their mother's attention." Katherine set aside the tiny shirt she was folding to take Emma's hands in hers. "I will always have time for you, Emma. You are as important to me as this baby, just in a different way. We might need to adjust our schedules sometimes, but I promise I will continue to be your teacher for as long as you need me." Relief flooded the girl's face. "Good. Because I was worried you might forget about me once you had a real child of your own." "Emma Hudson," Katherine said firmly, "listen to me carefully. You are real, you are important, and you hold a special place in my heart that no one, not even my own child, could ever replace. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I understand. Good." Katherine pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Now, shall we finish with these clothes before your father wonders what's become of you?" August arrived with relentless heat that made Katherine's advanced pregnancy even more uncomfortable. Doc Miller, making regular visits to the ranch as her time approached, pronounced her healthy but advised limiting her activities as much as possible. "The baby's positioned well," he told her during an examination in early August. "But in this heat, you need to be careful not to overexert yourself. No long walks, no horseback riding, and plenty of rest." Katherine agreed readily, finding that her usual energy had diminished as the baby grew. Her ankles swelled in the summer heat, and even the simplest tasks left her breathless. Hank became increasingly protective, rushing home between ranch duties to check on her and arranging for one of the ranch hands' wives to stay with her when he couldn't be nearby. It was during one such afternoon, with Mrs. Rodriguez knitting in the corner while Catherine dozed in her rocking chair, that the first pain struck a tightening across her abdomen that took her breath away. Mrs. Preston, Mrs. Rodriguez was at her side immediately, her weathered face creased with concern. "Is it time?" Catherine nodded, unable to speak as another contraction followed close on the heels of the first. Mrs. Rodriguez moved with efficient calm, sending one of her sons who had accompanied her to fetch Doc Miller from town and another to find Hank in the north pasture. "First babies often take their time," she assured Catherine as she helped her to the bedroom. "We have plenty of time to prepare." But Catherine's baby, like its mother, refused to conform to expectations. By the time Hank burst through the door an hour later, face white with concern, the contractions were coming fast and strong. "The doctor?" he asked Mrs. Rodriguez tersely. "On his way," she replied. "But this baby may not wait." Hank knelt beside the bed, taking Catherine's hand. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I'm right here with you." Catherine managed a smile between contractions. "Good," she gasped, "because I'm not doing this alone, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had delivered more than a dozen babies in her time, prepared the room, efficiently boiling water, laying out clean linens, arranging the items they would need when the baby arrived. "You're progressing quickly," she told Catherine after checking her progress. "The baby is eager to meet you." The hours that followed blurred into a haze of pain and effort for Catherine. She was dimly aware of Doc Miller arriving, of his calm voice giving instructions, of Hank's hand in hers, and his voice murmuring encouragement. But mostly she was aware of her body's urgent work, the overwhelming instinct to bring her child into the world. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor, Catherine gathered her remaining strength for a final push. The room seemed to hold its breath, and then a cry, thin and indignant, pierced the stillness. "A girl," Doc Miller announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant, "and a fine one at that." Exhausted but elated, Catherine reached for her daughter as the doctor placed the swaddled bundle in her arms. The baby's face was scrunched in displeasure at her abrupt entrance into the world, but she quieted as Catherine cradled her close. "Hope," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hope Preston, welcome to the world." Hank's face as he gazed at their daughter was a study in wonder. He reached out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek, and Hope turned toward it instinctively, her tiny mouth working. "She's perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Just like her mother." In the days that followed, visitors streamed to the foreman's house to offer congratulations and admire the newest member of the Double H family. Daniel Hudson arrived with an intricately carved wooden box containing a silver rattle that had belonged to Emma as a baby. Emma herself could hardly be persuaded to leave the baby's side, appointed herself official helper in all matters related to Hope. Even Martha Wheeler sent a gift once news reached Ordway, a beautiful handmade quilt with a note expressing her joy at Catherine's happiness, and her hope that someday they might meet again under better circumstances. As summer faded into autumn, Catherine found a new rhythm to her days. Hope proved to be a good-natured baby, with her father's steady temperament and her mother's observant eyes. Catherine resumed Emma's lessons on a modified schedule, often with Hope sleeping nearby or cradled in her mother's arms. One evening in late October, as the first anniversary of their wedding approached, Catherine sat nursing Hope on the porch while Hank finished his chores. The sunset painted the ranch in gold and amber, and a cool breeze carried the scent of autumn. Hank joined her, settling into the chair beside hers with a contented sigh. "Daniel offered me partnership in the ranch today," he said after a moment of comfortable silence. Catherine looked up from Hope's drowsy face, surprised. "Partnership, not just as foreman." "A full third of the Double H," Hank confirmed. He says it's been his plan for years, but he wanted to wait until I had settled down properly, as he put it. That's wonderful news, Katherine said warmly. You've earned it, Hank. No one works harder for this ranch than you do. He reached over to stroke Hope's wispy hair. It means our future is secure. Hope will grow up with land to her name, a place that's truly home. And perhaps siblings to share it with in time, Katherine added softly. Hank's eyes met hers, hope kindling in their depths. You'd want more children? I would, she admitted. Not right away, but yes, Hope should have brothers or sisters to grow up with, don't you think? The smile that spread across his face was answer enough. He leaned over to kiss her gently, careful not to disturb the now sleeping baby. Have I told you lately what a miracle you are, Katherine Preston? She laughed softly. I'm no miracle, just a woman who found where she belongs. The town gossips in Ordway would disagree, Hank pointed out with a wry smile. They'd say it's quite miraculous that the woman they cast out as barren now holds her daughter in her arms. Perhaps, Katherine acknowledged, but the real miracle isn't Hope's birth, wonderful as that is. It's finding a place where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can or cannot do. She gazed down at their daughter, her heart full. Finding you, finding this life, that's the true blessing. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the humiliation and rejection she had faced in Ordway to the love and acceptance she had found at the Double H, every step painful and joyful alike had led her here. Her name, once spoken with pity and scorn, had become a blessing through Hank's love. Katherine Preston, wife, mother, teacher valued for herself, not for her ability to bear children. And Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms, was not the validation of Katherine's worth, but rather the embodiment of the love she and Hank had found together. As Hank took her free hand in his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last. Not in a place, but in the hearts of those who loved her for exactly who she was. What are you thinking about? Hank asked softly, watching her face in the fading light. About names, she replied with a smile. How they can be curses or blessings, depending on who speaks them and how. And what is your name now? He asked, understanding her meaning. Katherine leaned over to kiss him, their daughter cradled between them. Beloved, she whispered against his lips, my name is Beloved.